When it comes to the issue of abortion, how much do you feel that it is going to be an issue, and how much of an influence do you feel that it could have on the presidential election?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one because we know from the race in 2022 that there was an increase in voter turnout overall of 10%. And pollsters have attributed that to the fact that there were so many folks from Gen Z and white suburban women who came in to vote on ballot measures relating to choice. In this particular election, I think when it comes to the swing states that have those measures on their ballot, Arizona and Nevada, I think it could work in a way that people haven't necessarily talked about yet. It's kind of like voting down ballot. So if there's, let's say, a suburban white woman who wants to vote for Trump but is hesitant because she hasn't been able to quell her fears about whether Trump would protect reproductive rights, she can vote to enshrine that right in the Constitution in her state and vote for Trump with a little less hesitancy. And so I think it's actually going to affect the presidential election dramatically in a way that maybe people haven't seen before.
Some people may say there are things that are happening in higher education that we feel have crossed the line or they have gotten out of control. So again, it feels like with all of these things we talk about, Madeline, there is this very sort of subjective piece, buffer in the middle that
yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up.
Work through, right?
Totally. So I think then our job here then is to frame the question that people need to ask themselves, right? Because if they are someone who says, yeah, I think the institutions in this country have gotten too liberal, the way that they got there, right, wasn't by force. It was because that was the culture around it. So are you okay with force being used to change it back? How far do you think, how much power do you think a presidential administration should have over the ideologies in a university? That's a fair question for people to ask themselves. And they can have whatever answer they want to. It may conflict with what the founding fathers wanted. It may require a constitutional amendment, but it's been a long time since we had one of those. Mm-hmm. And it's a fair question for people to say, how much power do I think the executive branch should have in deciding what we learn, and not just for this president, but for any president in the future.
Yeah. Lawyers do that. And my wife's a lawyer, and I always mispronounce this word. She chews me out for it. Voir, which is the
you
fancy
got it.
word for
That's exactly right.
Look at me.
French.
We have some cheese in the great room. Love or hate the man. So finding someone who's, I don't know, would seem to be difficult.
So I've thought about this question a lot. And when you are picking a jury, actually what you're doing is striking the folks who can't be on the jury because they've demonstrated a certain bias. So a lot of times people think that you pick your favorite people, but actually it's just who's left after you've gotten rid of the folks who have communicated answers that allow you to see that they have a bias. And so when you are conducting voir dire, when you're doing that, you want to try to figure out, one, whether or not they're coming in leaning towards one side or the other, and two, whether or not they have prejudged the facts and evidence of the case. And so that second consideration is going to be, regardless of politics, a consideration in every high-profile case.
I've talked about this issue now for a couple of months, and we always try to find the sort of the balance in these stories, and we will always continue to do that. This one has been really tricky, just as a journalist, and again, trying to just stay as down the middle as I can, as I've looked for supporters of this, and haven't necessarily seen a lot of people coming out in support. Even Republicans are, when they defend the president, seem to say things like, well, he's playing the long game, just wait, maybe there's a strategy here. What are you hearing kind of behind the strategy here? Like, why, when it seems like there's so much pushback and fear and concern that this could really spark a recession?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I had the same one, and I have a good friend who works for Turning Point USA. And I call him, he's my Scalia to my RBG. So I like to argue with him about things because he teaches me something. And so I actually called him right before I came on to ask him that very question. And so one of the good arguments that he gave me was that that the kind of tariffs that Trump imposed in 2017 worked in the way that he wanted to. So for example, with solar panels in China, Trump decided to slap a large tariff on solar panels. And as a result, people started buying American more, which increased the competition within the solar panel industry. And China just kind of went off and had to figure out another way to compromise for that. But the difference here, right, and that's a good argument. The difference here is that it's not just the solar panels, it's the lumber, it's the all the other elements that would go into building a house or a building, for example, at one time, which is quite similar to the way that the DOGE cuts are being made, right? It makes sense on both sides, and no Democrat can say in good conscience that they don't believe in cutting down the size of the federal government because it's been done so many times before by Democratic presidents. It's the way that it's being done, right? So if you're looking at it from an overall perspective, right, you're saying, yes, we could make better deals. We can't be stuck with deals that we've done forever in the past. But kind of just as a political analyst, when I look at this, I say, okay, if there's not a lot of careful attention that's being paid to what we're doing here, then perhaps really the goal is messaging and not actually changing the markets.
The issue here is there's confusion about this timeline, right? This relationship, when did it start between Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis and Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade? And the reason there is question is because they testified one thing, then they testified another thing, and now he's saying it's not relevant. So, Madeline, how does this impact credibility when it comes to prosecution on this case?
Sure. So when it comes to credibility, specifically on this appeal, you're not allowed as the appellate court to review the credibility of or credibility decisions that were already made by the trial court, because they aren't there to see it, and they're supposed to trust and rely on the findings of the trial court. And so it must be incredibly frustrating for everyone that's involved, because everyone has an opinion on whether somebody is telling the truth or not. And the only thing I could think of when it comes to the media consultant walking in is that it must have been so bad, like whatever he was about to say, that he was
getting jumbled with what he was saying, and he was trying to get around it. Yeah, so you're saying
whatever he would have let out that he wasn't supposed to, like having the news cycles talk about this instead was better in some way.
Right, so it begs the question, what was he going to say, right, Daryl? Go ahead, I know you're dying to say something.
What right does a foreign national who's here illegally and invading, let's look at this from a wartime perspective, have in the United States?
Right, so
what jurisdiction does the United States have over them?
So let me be clear. If you are physically present in the United States of America, within the jurisdictional bounds, if you are physically here, you have due process rights, you have free speech rights, period.
So what kind of due process do I need to give a person that is part of the Tren de Aragua?
So the point is that the due process is to figure out whether they're part of the Tren de Aragua. You don't get to assume that at first.
And who determines that?
The judge.
Okay, and how does the judge determine that?
With evidence.
What kind, like?
Both sides get to make their case. The state gets to make their case, or the feds get to make their case, and then you get to make your case. That's the entire point, is that you don't get to say that they're in a gang because of a checklist. You get to make your case in front of a judge. Like there are other countries that think that healthcare is a human right, or that housing is a human right. We picked due process and free speech. That's what we picked. So whether people like that or not, that's what the law is.
When they